Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was trained by Wolverine in the ways of survival? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had lost its color. That was the only way Izuku Midoriya could describe it. The vibrant hues of the city, the brilliant blue of the sky, the warm, hopeful yellow of All Might's costume, it had all desaturated into a uniform, oppressive gray. The sounds of the bustling evening crowds were a dull roar in his ears, a frequency he could no longer tune into. His own footsteps on the pavement were phantom thuds, disconnected from the legs that moved them. All Might's words echoed in the hollow space where his heart used to be, a cruel and relentless mantra. It's not wrong to dream. But you need to be realistic, kid. Realistic. The word was a physical blow, striking him again and again with each step he took. For 10 years, he had clung to a dream that everyone else had called impossible. His mother had apologized through tears. His classmates had jeered with cruel laughter. Bakugo had seared the impossibility into his skin with explosive scorn. But he had endured it all, fueled by the unwavering image of his idol's smile. The number one hero, the symbol of peace, had saved countless people with a laugh, proving that anything was possible. Until today. Today, that very same hero had looked him in the eye and snuffed out the last ember of his hope. He couldn't go home. Not yet. He couldn't face his mother's worried expression, couldn't bear to see the pity in her eyes when he finally broke down and told her that even All Might thought he was worthless. He needed to be somewhere that matched the landscape of his soul, a place of broken things, of discarded dreams. His feet, seemingly with a will of their own, led him away from the familiar residential streets and toward the industrial coastline. He passed shuttered warehouses and factories that stood like skeletal remains against the setting sun. The air grew thick with the smells of salt, rust, and neglect. He found his destination without consciously seeking it, a sprawling, unofficial junkyard that bled into the abandoned docklands. It was a metal graveyard, a mountain range of forgotten cars, twisted girders, and obsolete machinery. This felt right. This was a place for things that had outlived their purpose. He clambered over a crumbling concrete barrier, his worn red sneakers slipping on loose gravel. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the mournful cry of a distant gull and the groan of metal shifting under its own immense weight. He navigated the narrow canyons formed by towering piles of scrap, his small frame dwarfed by the metallic behemoths. He ran a hand over a car door, its paint peeled away to reveal a filigree of rust. He saw a television with a shattered screen, its lifeless eye staring back at him. He was one of them. A broken, useless thing. He finally slumped down onto the hood of a rusted-out truck, the metal cool against his uniform trousers. He pulled his charred notebook from his backpack. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The title was a bitter joke now. He flipped through the pages, his own detailed drawings and frantic analyses mocking him. All this work. All this dedication. For what? To be told to be a police officer? It was good work, noble work, but it wasn't his dream. It was a consolation prize. A participation trophy for a life he didn't want. A single, hot tear escaped and splashed onto the page, smudging the ink of All Might's signature. Izuku slammed the notebook shut with a cry of pure, undiluted anguish that was swallowed by the labyrinth of junk. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the sobs he had been holding back since that rooftop. It was in the depths of this despair that the world tore itself open. It didn't start with a sound, but with a feeling. The air grew heavy, thick with static electricity that made the fine hairs on his arms stand on end. A low hum vibrated through the metal beneath him, a deep, resonant thrum that felt fundamentally wrong. Izuku lifted his head, wiping his eyes, his ingrained analytical instincts momentarily overriding his grief. The smell hit him next, ozone, sharp and sterile like the aftermath of a lightning strike, mixed with something else, something coppery and wild. Then he saw it, about 50 meters away, in a small clearing amidst the scrap. The air began to shimmer, like heat haze on a summer road. The shimmer warped, twisted, and then ripped. A jagged, vertical tear of pure, chaotic energy split the fabric of reality. It was a nauseating spectacle of swirling colors that didn't belong in this world, a violent vortex that emitted a high-pitched whine that scraped at the inside of his skull. Izuku froze, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't a quirk. He had analyzed thousands of quirks, and none of them looked or felt like this. This was something else entirely. Something alien. As quickly as it appeared, the rift convulsed. With a deafening crack that sounded like the universe snapping in half, it spat something out. A dark shape, a man, was violently ejected from the portal, tumbling through the air before crashing into a mountain of rusted sheet metal with a sickening crunch and a shower of sparks. The rift, its purpose served, snapped shut with a final, thunderous boom, leaving behind only a profound silence and a lingering smell of ozone. Every instinct screamed at Izuku to run. To hide. To pretend he hadn't seen the impossible. The man, whoever he was, had been thrown with enough force to kill him 10 times over. He could be a villain, a monster from another dimension for all he knew. It was foolish, dangerous, and completely reckless to approach, but as he stared at the crumpled figure lying motionless in the wreckage, another, deeper instinct took over. The same instinct that had made him run toward the sludge villain just a few hours ago. The instinct that was the very core of his being. He looks like he needs help. Slowly, shakily, Izuku slid off the truck hood. His legs felt like lead, but he forced them to move. He picked his way carefully through the debris, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The closer he got, the more details he could make out. The man was built like a block of granite, shorter than he'd first appeared but impossibly broad and dense with muscle. He wore a ripped, dirty white tank top and worn jeans, both soaked in patches with something dark. His black hair was wild and unkempt, styled into 2 distinctive horn-like peaks. And he was hurt. Badly. A long, deep gash ran down his side, bleeding sluggishly. His face was a mask of bruises and cuts. As Izuku took another tentative step, the man stirred. A low, guttural growl, more animal than human, rumbled from his chest. He pushed himself up onto one knee, his head bowed. He was breathing in harsh, ragged gasps. Hey! Izuku squeaked, his voice barely a whisper. Are you okay? The man's head snapped up. His eyes, burning with a feral intensity Izuku had never seen before, locked onto him. They were the eyes of a cornered wolf, filled with pain, rage, and a weariness that seemed ancient. A snarl twisted his lips, revealing canine teeth that were just a little too sharp. Stay back, kid! He rasped, his voice a gravelly baritone that grated like stones being dragged over concrete. It was a language Izuku understood, but the accent was harsh, foreign. North American, maybe? Izuku flinched but held his ground. He held up his hands, palms open, a universal gesture of peace. I am not going to hurt you. You're bleeding. The man, Logan, tried to get to his feet. His senses were a maelstrom of conflicting information. The world smelled wrong. The sounds were wrong. He could feel the ache of a dozen broken bones already knitting themselves back together, the throb of torn muscle stitching itself shut. The fight had been brutal, Omega Red again, but the aftermath was worse. That damn dimensional portal. He'd been thrown through it like a piece of garbage. And now he was here. Wherever here was. And there was a kid. A small, green-haired boy with wide, terrified eyes that held a bizarre and unwelcome flicker of concern. Logan's instincts, honed by a century of violence, screamed threat. Neutralize it. But his healing factor was working overtime, leaving him dizzy and disoriented. He put a hand to his side, feeling the torn flesh already closing up, but the blood loss had been significant. He swayed, a wave of vertigo washing over him. He saw the kid take a hesitant step forward. I said stay back. Logan growled, the warning more potent this time. Without conscious thought, 3 long, metallic claws slid from between his knuckles with a horrifying snick. They gleamed with a deadly light in the fading sun, each one a foot long and honed to a razor's edge. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. Claws. Metal claws, extending from the man's hands. A transformation-type quirk? No, they looked too solid, too real. He had never seen anything like it. Fear, cold and absolute, washed over him. He should be running. He should be screaming. This man was dangerous, an unknown variable with weapons literally built into his body. But then he saw it. The man's hand was trembling. Not from rage, but from exhaustion. He was leaning heavily against the pile of scrap, his knuckles white. The claws were a warning, yes, but they were the desperate threat of a wounded animal trying to scare off a perceived predator. And Izuku saw the wound on his side again. It was still bleeding. Even with a powerful healing quirk, a wound that deep needed to be cleaned and dressed to prevent infection. The hero analyst in him took over, cataloging the data. The pragmatist, however, was already unzipping his backpack. Please, Izuku said, his voice shaking but firm. You're hurt. Just, let me help. He slowly knelt, placing his backpack on the ground. He pulled out his water bottle and a spare, clean t-shirt he kept for gym class. He held them out. It's not much. But you can clean the wound. Logan stared. He stared at the outstretched hands, at the bottle of water, at the folded shirt. He stared at the kid's face. The fear was still there, plain as day in his wide, emerald eyes, but underneath it was a stubborn, idiotic sincerity. In a life filled with betrayal, violence, and cynicism, this simple, selfless gesture was so alien it short-circuited his brain. He'd been shot, stabbed, blown up, and hunted by men and monsters alike. People ran from him, or they tried to kill him. They didn't offer him a bandage. He let out a short, harsh breath that might have been a laugh. The claws, slowly, almost reluctantly, retracted back into his fists with a soft, fleshy sound. He slumped back against the metal, the last of his adrenaline fading. Gimme! He grunted, nodding toward the water. Izuku scrambled forward, keeping a respectful distance, and placed the bottle and shirt on a flat piece of metal near the man. He then backed away several paces, sitting on his heels to show he wasn't a threat. Logan snatched the bottle, unscrewed the cap with practiced ease, and downed half of it in one long swallow. He poured the rest over the gash on his side, hissing as the cool water hit the raw flesh. He used Izuku's shirt to roughly clean the wound, wincing as he did. Izuku watched, fascinated and horrified, as the edges of the deep cut seemed to slowly, visibly crawl back together. A healing quirk then, an incredibly powerful one. But it clearly wasn't instantaneous, and it didn't negate the pain. A tense silence fell between them, broken only by Logan's harsh breathing and the distant city hum. "What's your name, kid?" Logan finally asked, his voice still rough but lacking the earlier edge of aggression. Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya, Logan, the man replied simply. He looked around the junkyard, his gaze sharp and calculating. Where am I? What city is this? Mizudafu, Japan. Izuku answered. Logan's brow furrowed. He'd never heard of it. Right. And what's with all the costumes? Saw a few on my way down. He gestured vaguely, as if referring to something he'd seen through the portal. Izuku blinked. Costumes? You mean the heroes? Logan let out another humorless chuckle. Heroes, huh? That what they're calling themselves these days, of course. Like All Might, the #1 hero. Izuku said, the name leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. The name meant nothing to Logan. He finished wiping the now mostly closed wound and tossed the blood-soaked shirt aside. He looked back at Izuku, his gaze piercing. You look like you just lost a war, kid. What's your story? The question was so direct, so blunt, that it broke through Izuku's carefully constructed dam of composure. The despair of the day came flooding back in a tidal wave. His chin trembled. I met my hero today, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. He told me I couldn't be a hero. He told me to be realistic. Logan raised a thick eyebrow. Why? You got the wrong, what did you call it? Quirk? Izuku shook his head, a fresh wave of tears blurring his vision. He hugged his knees to his chest. I don't have one. He choked out, the word tasting like poison. I'm quirkless. Logan stared at him, processing the word. Quirkless. A label. A brand. He'd seen it his whole life. Mutant. Animal. Weapon. He knew exactly what that word meant. It meant the world saw you as less. It meant you were on the outside, looking in. He scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. But the scorn wasn't directed at Izuku. It was directed at the world that had put that look in his eyes. The look of a kicked dog that's been told it doesn't deserve to live. Quirkless, huh? Logan grunted, pushing himself to his feet. He was still unsteady, but his strength was returning with every passing second. Just a fancy word for normal. The world's full of them. Izuku looked up, startled. No one had ever said that to him. They either pitied him or scorned him. No one had ever just dismissed the label as meaningless. But you need a quirk to be a hero, Izuku insisted, reciting the gospel he'd been preached his whole life. To save people. To fight villains. Logan took a step closer, his shadow falling over the boy. He wasn't tall, but his presence was immense, radiating a sense of compressed power and dangerous gravity. He looked down at Izuku, his expression unreadable. He saw the tears, the broken posture, the utter devastation. But he saw something else, too. Beneath all that pain, deep in the boy's eyes was a flicker, a stubborn, resilient little flame that hadn't been extinguished. It was the same spark that had made the kid run toward danger to help a stranger. The same spark that had kept Logan himself getting up, decade after decade, fight after fight. Kid, let me tell you something about being a hero, Logan said, his voice low and serious. It ain't about the powers. It ain't about the flashy costumes or the smiling for the cameras. That's just noise. He tapped his own temple with a thick finger. It's about what's in here. And what's in here? He thumped his chest, right over his heart. It's about getting knocked down, over and over, and having the guts to get back up every single time. It's about running toward the fire when everyone else is running away. He crouched down, bringing himself to Izuku's eye level. The smell of old leather, sweat, and something metallic, like blood and steel, clung to him. You ran toward me, Logan stated simply. A scared kid, no powers, and you saw a cornered animal with knives coming out of his hands, and you ran toward me. That's got nothing to do with a quirk. That's just guts. Izuku stared, mesmerized. This gruff, wounded stranger understood him in a way no one else ever had. Not his mother. Not his teachers. Not even All Might. He hadn't seen a useless, quirkless Deku. He had seen a flicker of strength. Logan could see the conflict in the boy's eyes. He didn't know how he got here, or how long he'd be stuck. He was a loner, not a teacher. He didn't do partners, he didn't do sidekicks. But looking at this broken kid, who reflected a part of his own long, painful past, a sudden, uncharacteristic impulse seized him. He couldn't give the kid powers. He couldn't make the world fair, but he could give him something else. He could give him the tools that had kept him alive for over a century. He could give him the one gift he'd earned in blood and pain, survival. He stood up, his decision made. They told you to be realistic, Logan said, the words hanging in the cool evening air. Fine. Let's be realistic. He turned to face Izuku fully, his stance solid, his eyes holding an unnerving intensity. I can't give you claws or a healing factor, kid. The world ain't that kind. I can't give you one of these quirks. But I can teach you how to fight. How to endure. How to survive when the world wants you dead. His voice dropped, becoming a low, serious growl that promised nothing but hardship. It's gonna hurt. More than anything you've ever felt. Every single day you train with me, you're gonna want to quit. You're gonna want to run home crying. I'm gonna break you down to nothing, over and over, until there's nothing left but steel. He took a step closer, looming over the still kneeling boy. But if you live through it, he finished, his voice a raw whisper. If you survive what I put you through, you'll be unbreakable. And then we'll see who tells you what you can or can't be. The offer hung in the silence of the junkyard. It wasn't the hand of a smiling savior like All Might. It was the callous, blood-stained hand of a killer, a survivor, a monster. It wasn't a promise of fame or glory. It was a promise of pain, of suffering, of a trial by fire from which he might not emerge. It was everything he never knew he wanted. The gray world around Izuku Midoriya seemed to snap back into focus. He saw the deep, complex lines on Logan's face, etched by a lifetime of pain he couldn't possibly comprehend. He saw the setting sun glinting off the countless scars that crisscrossed his muscular arms. He saw the truth in those ancient, weary eyes. This was real. More real than any smiling hero on a screen. The tears that came now weren't from sadness or despair. They were tears of catharsis. A release of all the pain and frustration, and the birth of something new. A grim, terrifying, beautiful resolve. He looked up at the man who called himself Logan, this stray from another world. He didn't have to say a word. Logan saw the answer in the way the boy's trembling stopped, in the way his spine straightened, in the way that tiny, flickering ember in his eyes roared into an inferno. Izuku Midoriya pushed himself to his feet, wiping the tears from his face with the back of his hand. He stood on the uneven ground of the metal graveyard, a small, quirkless boy who had been told to give up on his dream. And for the first time since he was 4 years old, he didn't feel broken. He felt the first, sharp, painful edges of being forged. He met Logan's gaze and gave a single, determined nod. The Wolverine grinned. It was not a kind expression. It was the grin of a predator that had just found its cub. Good, Logan said. Your new life starts tomorrow. Dawn. Don't be late. Dawn broke over Muzurifu, painting the sky in delicate shades of rose and gold. For most of the city's residents, it was a gentle promise of a new day. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a threat. He stood at the edge of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, a place that had long ago surrendered its beauty to the currents of human carelessness. It was less a beach and more a landfill that had been assaulted by the tide. Mountains of rusted appliances, tangled fishing nets, soggy furniture, and countless plastic bags formed a man-made reef of decay that stretched as far as the eye could see. The air was thick with the stench of brine, rust, and rot. And standing beside him, arms crossed over his impossibly broad chest, was Logan. He hadn't changed out of his worn jeans and tank top, and he looked as elemental and out of place as a boulder in a flower garden. Look at it! Logan grunted, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in Izuku's bones. Really look at it, kid, Izuku did. He saw a task beyond comprehension. It's huge, he stammered, his analytical mind already doing the math. Even with heavy machinery, it would take a professional crew months, maybe years, to clear all this. Don't have heavy machinery. Don't have a crew. Got you, Logan said, turning his piercing gaze on him. And me. But how? Logan pointed a thick, calloused finger at a single, half-buried refrigerator a few feet away. You don't move the mountain. You move one rock. Then another. Then another. This place ain't just your gym, kid, it's your first lesson. The world's gonna throw impossible tasks at you. Things that'll make you want to curl up and quit before you even start. This, he swept his arm across the vista of trash, is you learning how to face that. You start now, and so it began. The first day was a circle of hell Izuku could never have imagined. His task was simple, haul pieces of junk from one designated pile to another, sorting them. The reality was brutal. The metal was sharp and rusted, slicing through his thin gloves and scoring his palms. The appliances were waterlogged and impossibly heavy. His muscles, accustomed only to the light exercise of a middle schooler, screamed in protest within the first hour. The sun climbed higher, beating down on him, and sweat stung the cuts on his hands and the tears in his eyes. Logan didn't help. He watched. He was a silent, brooding statue, observing Izuku's every move, his every pained grimace. He offered no encouragement, no water, no respite. He just watched, his expression a mask of stony neutrality. By midday, Izuku's body was a symphony of agony. His back felt like it was going to snap, his arms were jelly, and his legs trembled with every step. He dropped a waterlogged engine block, its weight pulling him down to his knees. He stayed there, panting, staring at his raw, bleeding hands. I can't, he gasped, the words tasting like failure. It's too much. He heard the crunch of boots on sand and gravel. Logan was standing over him, his shadow a cold blanket. Izuku braced himself for a harsh dismissal, to be called weak, to be told this was a mistake. Instead, Logan crouched down. It hurts, doesn't it? He said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Izuku nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Good, Logan said, his voice quiet but intense. Pain's a good teacher. It's honest. Tells you where your limits are. Tells you you're alive. Most people spend their lives running from it. A hero, a real one, has to learn to live with it. Make it a neighbor. Not a welcome one, but one you know how to deal with when it comes knocking. He stood up. Your limit for today is right here. Remember this feeling. Tomorrow you're gonna push past it. He tossed the small, wrapped bundle at Izuku's feet. It was a simple lunch, a hunk of cheese, some dried meat, and a piece of bread. Eat. Drink your water. Then get back to it. The sun ain't gone yet. That became the rhythm of his life. Every day, from dawn till dusk, was spent on that beach. The first week, every muscle in his body burned with a fire that never went out. He'd collapse into bed at night, too exhausted to even dream, and wake up so stiff he could barely move. But he'd drag himself out of bed, meet the silent, waiting figure of his mentor, and begin the Sisyphean task once more. Logan slowly began to add new torments to the routine. The days now started with a 5-mile run along the coastline, Logan loping beside him with an infuriating ease while Izuku's lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. After the day's labor on the beach, when Izuku was at his most exhausted and his limbs were screaming for rest, the real training began. It was during one of these twilight sessions, 2 weeks into his ordeal, that Logan delivered the lesson of the chapter's title. "All right, kid. Drop the tire," Logan ordered. Izuku gratefully let the massive truck tire he'd been carrying fall to the sand. He bent over, hands on his knees, sucking in deep, ragged breaths. "You're tired. Your guard is down. Your mind's on going home," Logan said, circling him like a shark. "Perfect time for a real fight to start. Put your hands up." Izuku blinked, confused. "What? You heard me. Put them up. Fight in stance." Hesitantly, Izuku straightened up and raised his fists in a clumsy imitation of the boxing stances he'd seen on TV. He was off balance, his body screaming with fatigue. Logan didn't give him time to prepare. He moved with a speed that was utterly terrifying in a man his size. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next he was inside Izuku's guard. A hard, open palm strike to the solar plexus drove the air from Izuku's lungs in a violent whoosh. He doubled over, gagging, his vision swimming with black spots. "Rom!" Logan grunted. "You tensed up. Try to meet force with force. You absorb. You redirect. Get up." Izuku struggled for breath, pushing himself upright. He raised his fists again, his body trembling. Logan came at him again, a blur of motion. Izuku tried to dodge, but his exhausted legs wouldn't obey. A leg sweep sent him sprawling onto his back. The landing knocked what little air he'd recovered out of him again. Sand filled his mouth. "Rom!" came the gravelly voice from above. "You watched my shoulders. Bad habit. Amateurs watch the shoulders or the eyes. You watch the center. The hips. The core. Everything starts there. Get up." Tears of pain and frustration pricked at Izuku's eyes. He spit out sand and staggered to his feet. "I am trying. Tryin' ain't doin'." Again. This time it was a jab, not fast, not hard, but perfectly placed. It snapped his head back and sent a jolt down his spine. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. "You flinched. Close your eyes. In a fight, you close your eyes, you wake up dead," Logan said, his tone flat and clinical. "Get up." This continued for what felt like an eternity. Logan never hit him hard enough to do serious damage. His control was absolute. But each blow was precise, painful, and accompanied by a sharp, brutal critique. He was dismantling Izuku, not just physically, but mentally. He was breaking down every preconceived notion Izuku had about fighting. Fights in the comics and on the news were ballets of brightly colored powers. This was ugly, gritty, and humiliating. There were no heroic poses, no triumphant shouts. There was only the thud of a fist, the scrape of skin on sand, and the cold, relentless litany of his own failures. Finally, after a particularly sharp rap to the ribs sent him down for the 10th time, Izuku just stayed there. He lay curled on his side, the cool sand a small comfort against his bruised cheek. He just couldn't get up again. The pain wasn't the worst part. It was the hopelessness. How could he ever be a hero if he couldn't even stand up to this? Stay down then, Logan said, his voice suddenly quiet. Quit. Go home. Tell your ma you scraped your knee. Go be a cop. Be realistic. That word. Realistic. It was a spark on dry tinder. The image of All Might, gaunt and sad on that rooftop, flashed in his mind. The memory of Bakugo's sneering face, smoke rising from his palms. Useless, quirkless Deku. Something inside him snapped. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't bravery. It was pure, undiluted rage. A cold, hard fury at a world that had written him off. At everyone who had ever told him he wasn't good enough. With a guttural snarl that sounded more like the man standing over him than the boy he used to be, Izuku pushed himself off the ground. He wasn't on his feet, but on his knees, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He was shaking, not from exhaustion, but from a newfound wellspring of anger. Logan watched, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Approval. There it is, Logan said softly. Pain. Fear. Anger. They ain't your enemies, kid. They're fuel. You learn to burn it, it'll keep you going when everything else is gone. Lesson 1 is over. Get up, we're done for tonight. That night marked a fundamental shift in Izuku. The training didn't get any easier, in fact, it got harder. Logan expanded his curriculum beyond the beach. They moved into the dense forests that bordered the city, a place where the rules of civilization fell away. Here, Logan was in his element. He taught Izuku how to move silently, how to use the terrain for cover, how to be aware of his surroundings with every sense he possessed. The physical conditioning was paired with a brutal combat regimen. Logan taught him a mix of military close-quarters combat, Krav Maga, and dirty, back-alley brawling. There were no elegant katas, no formal dojo etiquette. The lessons were practical and vicious. Forget the fancy kicks, Logan would grunt, blocking a clumsy attempt from Izuku. A real fight's decided in 3 moves or less. First, you disrupt. An eye gouge, a throat strike, a kick to the groin, something that short-circuits their brain. Second, you disable. Break a knee, shatter an elbow, dislocate a shoulder. Take away their ability to fight back. Third, you end it. Or you escape. Never stick around to admire your work. Izuku's notebooks, once his most prized possessions, began to change. He still carried them everywhere, but their contents would have horrified his middle school teachers. The colorful, adoring sketches of heroes were gone. In their place were stark, anatomical drawings of the human body, meticulously copied from a medical textbook Logan had shoplifted. Red circles and stark annotations marked weak points, the temple, the carotid artery, the floating ribs, the femoral nerve. His analysis of pro-heroes shifted from fawning praise to cold, tactical assessment. Kamui Wood's arbor quirk. Limbs are vulnerable to fire and sharp, severing attacks. Core body remains stationary during large attacks, creating a massive opening. Conclusion: high offense, poor defense against a fast, close-quarters opponent. Empty lady, gigantification. Massive target with slow reaction times. Vulnerable points, ankles, knees, inner ear for balance disruption. Effectiveness drastically reduced in enclosed spaces. Conclusion: a one-trick pony, easily countered with environmental awareness. He was learning to see the world not through the eyes of a fan, but through the eyes of a predator. He was learning to see heroes and villains not as idols or monsters, but as opponents with strengths to be neutralized and weaknesses to be exploited. The mental conditioning was the most grueling part. Logan was relentless in his attempts to break Izuku's spirit, to temper it into something that wouldn't shatter under pressure. He would berate him, insult him, push him until he was sobbing with frustration and pain, and then force him to perform a complex task, teaching him to compartmentalize his emotions and focus on the mission at hand. One evening, after a particularly brutal sparring session, Logan built a small fire on the beach. He caught a few fish from the surf with a makeshift spear and was roasting them over the flames. He and Izuku sat in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire, and the rhythmic crash of the waves. Izuku's body was a canvas of bruises, his lip was split, and he was fairly certain he had a cracked rib. Logan handed him a cooked fish on a piece of scavenged wood. Eat. Izuku ate, the simple, smoky flavor of the fish the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted. For a few minutes, they were just two people sharing a meal by the ocean. Why? Izuku finally asked, his voice hoarse. Why are you doing this? Logan stared into the fire, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. The light caught the network of old scars on his face, each one telling a story of violence and survival. Once, Logan began, his voice low and raspy. A long time ago. I was an animal. Just a weapon in a cage that people pointed at their problems. I didn't have a name. Didn't have a choice, just instinct and rage. He paused, the memory casting a long shadow over his features. Someone saw something more in me. A kid. A family. They gave me a chance to be a man. They paid for it. He looked over at Izuku, his eyes holding a profound and ancient sadness. I look at you, kid. I see that same look I had. The world put you in a cage and told you what you were. Quirkless. Useless. I'm not teaching you how to be a hero. I'm teaching you how to break the damn cage. What you do after that, that's up to you. The months bled into one another. The seasons began to turn. The mountain of trash on Dagoba Beach shrank, slowly, painstakingly, piece by agonizing piece. And Izuku changed with it. He shed his baby fat, his body hardening into whipcord muscle and sinew. His frame was still slight, but it was dense, coiled with a latent power that had nothing to do with a quirk. His skin, once pale and freckled, was tanned and crisscrossed with a roadmap of faint, silvery scars. His eyes changed most of all. The timid, tearful desperation was gone. In its place was a quiet, unnerving watchfulness. He moved with a new economy of motion, a predator's grace. He was no longer the boy who flinched at his own shadow. The culmination of this phase of his training came nearly 9 months after it began. The beach was almost clean, a testament to his impossible labor. They were sparring again, the setting sun casting long shadows on the sand. Izuku was exhausted, as always, but it was a familiar exhaustion now, a dull ache that he could push to the back of his mind. Logan came at him, a relentless barrage of strikes and feints. For the first time, Izuku was able to keep up. He wasn't winning, not even close, but he wasn't just a punching bag anymore. He moved, he dodged, he blocked. He used his smaller size to his advantage, staying in Logan's blind spots, forcing the bigger man to constantly adjust. Logan grunted, impressed despite himself, and upped the intensity. He threw a heavy right cross aimed at Izuku's head. Izuku, instead of blocking it, ducked under the blow. It was a feint. Logan's other hand was already coming around in a vicious backhand. Izuku saw it coming. He didn't have time to dodge. He couldn't block it. So he did the one thing Logan had drilled into him for months. He acted. As the backhand approached, he dropped to one knee, scooped up a handful of sand, and threw it directly into Logan's face. Logan roared, momentarily blinded, his eyes stinging. It was a cheap, dirty trick. It was perfect. That 1 second of distraction was all Izuku needed. He didn't try to land a heroic punch. He didn't aim for the jaw. He lunged forward, low to the ground, and drove his shoulder hard into Logan's right knee, a joint that had been damaged in the fight that brought him to this dimension and was still a weak point. It wasn't enough to injure him, but the surprise and the targeted blow threw the bigger man off balance. Logan stumbled back a step, shaking his head to clear it. By the time his vision cleared, Izuku was back on his feet, 10 feet away, breathing heavily, his fists up. He hadn't hurt Logan. He hadn't won. But he had created an opening. He had survived the exchange. He had fought back not with power, but with instinct and cunning. The beach was silent for a long moment. Logan wiped the sand from his eyes, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. It was a grin of pure, unadulterated pride. Good, he grunted, the single word echoing in the twilight. You stopped thinking like a target. You're learning that. Izuku stood his ground, his body aching, his knuckles raw. He looked at his scarred hands, then at the vast, clean expanse of the beach, and finally at the fierce, proud man in front of him. The first lesson had been pain. He had endured it. He had learned from it. And for the first time in his life, as the last rays of the sun disappeared below the horizon, Izuku Midoriya felt strong, not because he had a dream of being a hero, but because he was finally learning how to survive. The city was a cage of noise. That was one of the first things Logan had taught him. The constant drone of traffic, the cacophony of voices, the electronic jingles bleeding from every storefront. It was an assault on the senses designed to dull them, to make you deaf and blind to the world as it truly was. It was a comfortable blindness, a warm blanket of static that kept you from noticing the subtle cues of danger, the quiet whispers of intent that preceded violence. To be a survivor, a true fighter, you had to shed that blanket. You had to learn to listen again. That was why they had left the familiar, reclaimed shores of Dagoba Beach behind. Their new training ground was a vast, primeval forest that sprawled across the hills on the outskirts of Muzurifu. Here, the noise of the city was a distant, forgotten hum. Here, the world spoke in a different language. It was a language of rustling leaves, snapping twigs, the scent of damp earth, and the weight of the air before a storm. It was Logan's native tongue, and it was a language Izuku had to become fluent in if he was to survive. They stood in a small, sun-dappled clearing, the ancient trees forming a silent coliseum around them. Izuku, now 10 months into his training, was a different creature from the weeping boy Logan had found in the junkyard. The change was stark. He was lean, corded with the kind of dense, functional muscle that comes not from lifting weights, but from moving the world one piece at a time. A lattice of faint, silvery scars decorated his arms and knuckles, testaments to his grueling education. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, his posture no longer the apologetic slump of a victim but the balanced stillness of a coiled spring. "The world talks, kid," Logan said, his voice a low growl that was perfectly at home amongst the whispering trees. "Everything in it. The wind, the ground, the animals. They're all telling you a story. Problem is, people like you have forgotten how to listen. You got these big ears, but you don't hear nothing. You got these big eyes, but you don't see nothing. Today, that changes. We're gonna shut off the noise so you can finally start to hear the music." With that, Logan produced a strip of black cloth. Blindfold. Izuku's heart gave a nervous flutter, but he didn't question the order. He took the cloth and tied it securely around his eyes, plunging his world into a soft, impenetrable darkness. The immediate effect was disorienting. His sense of balance wavered, and the familiar clearing suddenly felt vast and threatening. The forest sounds, which had been a peaceful backdrop, swelled in volume, becoming a confusing mess of chirps, rustles, and creaks. "Breathe," Logan commanded. "Stop panicking. Your ears are working overtime to make up for your eyes. You're hearing everything, which means you're hearing nothing. Focus. Filter it. Pick one sound and follow it." Izuku forced himself to take a slow, deep breath, just as Logan had taught him. He focused on the sound of the wind, tracing its path through the canopy above. He could hear the difference in the rustle of the pine needles versus the broad leaves of an oak. He began to separate the calls of the birds, the sharp, repetitive chirp of a sparrow, the distant, mournful coo of a pigeon. Crack! A sharp sound from his left made him jump. He spun toward it, his hands coming up defensively. "What was that?" Logan's voice was close, right beside his ear, making him flinch again. "A twig snapping," Izuku answered, his voice tight. "What snapped it?" I don't know." "An animal? What kind of animal?" Logan pressed. "A 200-pound boar crashes through the undergrowth. A 20-pound raccoon sneaks. A 5-ounce squirrel hops. They all snap twigs. But they all sound different. The weight, the speed, the rhythm. It's a signature. You learn to read it." Again, this became the first drill. Logan would move around the clearing, and Izuku, blindfolded, had to track him. At first, it was impossible. Logan moved with a supernatural silence that was maddening, but slowly, painstakingly, Izuku began to learn. He stopped listening for footsteps and started listening for the subtle displacement of air, the faint whisper of cloth, the almost imperceptible crunch of a single grain of dirt under a boot. Then came the sounds of the world itself. Logan would point. "What's that? A bird. What kind?" "I don't know. It's a Japanese bush warbler. Sings when it's looking for a mate. Over there." He pointed in another direction. That's the sound of a beetle burrowing into a dead log. That low hum then? A beehive, about 50 feet up in that old cedar. All information. A lovesick bird ain't paying attention. A beetle means rotted, softwood you don't want to put your weight on. A beehive means a potential weapon if you're desperate, or a bad place to hide. See? The world is talking. Next came scent. Logan untied the blindfold only to have Izuku close his eyes. He crushed a handful of pine needles under his nose. What is it? Pine, good. Now this. He held out a clump of damp, dark soil, earth, and moss. It's from the shady side of a tree. Logan's lips quirked in a hint of a smile. Not bad. He rubbed a pungent-smelling leaf between his fingers. This? Izuku sniffed. It's minty. Wild mint? Yeah. Good for covering your scent if you're being tracked. Or for making a half-decent tea. Everything has a purpose. The final test of scent was the hardest. Find me, Logan said before melting back into the trees. Izuku, his eyes now open, had to follow him not by sight or sound, but by smell alone. It felt absurd, like something out of a comic book. But he tried. He got down on his hands and knees, ignoring the dirt and damp. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, trying to filter out the overwhelming perfume of the forest. He searched for something out of place. The scent of pine and dirt was the baseline. He needed to find the anomaly. And there it was. Faint, but distinct. The smell of old leather, sweat, and something uniquely Logan, a sharp, metallic, coppery tang that reminded Izuku of blood and steel. It was the scent of the Wolverine. He followed it, crawling at first, then walking, his head up, sniffing the air like an animal. He found Logan leaning against a tree 100 yards away, watching him with an unreadable expression. Most animals, Logan explained as Izuku approached, live and die by this. Scent tells them where to find food, where to find a mate, and when a predator is coming. Humans used to have it. Then they built walls and cities and forgot. But it's still in there. Buried. You just gotta dig it out. The drills continued for weeks. Izuku learned to feel the subtle shift in air pressure on his skin that heralded a gust of wind or the movement of a large body nearby. He learned to walk barefoot, feeling the texture of the ground, differentiating between solid earth, loose soil, and roots hidden just beneath the surface. He learned to see, truly see, not just looking at the forest but observing it, noticing the unnatural bend in a branch that indicated something had passed by, the faint scuff mark on a rock, the way the light caught a single, disturbed spider web. His mind, a natural sponge for data, absorbed it all. His notebooks filled with new kinds of analysis. He sketched different animal tracks, diagrammed how wind affects scent trails, and wrote detailed notes on edible versus poisonous plants. He was building a new database, one based not on quirks and ultimate moves, but on the fundamental laws of survival. One evening, as the sun began its descent, casting long, finger-like shadows through the trees, Logan declared the lessons over. You can hear a little better now, Logan said, his tone flat. You can see a little clearer. But all the lessons in the world don't mean squat until you use them when your heart's trying to beat its way out of your chest. The lesson's over. Now's the exam. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in Izuku's stomach. The exam? Logan's eyes, which had been the patient, if gruff, eyes of a teacher, shifted. They became flat, cold, and predatory. It was a look that stripped away all the humanity and left only the animal. I'm gonna hunt you, he said, the words devoid of any emotion. This forest is the board. You're the rabbit, I'm the wolf. The river to the north is the boundary. You make it there, you pass, I catch you. He left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging in the air with terrifying weight. You got a 30-minute head start. He checked a worn, military-style watch on his wrist. Starts now. For a second, Izuku was paralyzed. This wasn't a spar. This wasn't a drill. The look in Logan's eyes promised a different level of reality. This was real. Then, instinct took over. The same instinct that made a deer bolt at the scent of a wolf. He turned and ran. He crashed through the undergrowth with reckless abandon, his only thought to put as much distance as possible between himself and Logan. Branches whipped at his face, thorns tore at his clothes, and his feet stumbled on unseen roots. The controlled, rhythmic breathing Logan had taught him was gone, replaced by ragged, panicked gasps. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. He ran for a solid 10 minutes, blind flight his only strategy. He finally collapsed at the base of a large oak tree, his lungs burning, his sides stitched with a cramp. He pressed his back against the rough bark, straining his ears. Silence. A deep, profound silence that was somehow more terrifying than a roar of pursuit. Mistake number 1, a voice in his head, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Logan's, growled. Panic is a sloppy trail. You left a path a blind man could follow. Izuku looked back the way he had come. He could see it now, the trail of broken branches, trampled ferns, and scuffed earth. It was a highway pointing directly to him. He had to be smarter. He pushed himself to his feet, his mind racing. Okay. Think. What did he teach me? First, break the trail. He spotted a shallow creek nearby, its water burbling over smooth stones. He scrambled down the bank and began to walk upstream, stepping carefully from rock to rock. The cold water shocked his tired muscles but also cleared his head. Water would wash away his scent and hide his footprints. It was a classic evasion tactic, one he'd read about and one Logan had confirmed. He followed the creek for several hundred yards before climbing out onto a large, moss-covered boulder, careful not to leave any marks on the muddy bank. From the boulder, he leaped to the thick, low-hanging branch of a pine tree, swinging his body onto it. He moved through the lower canopy for as long as he could, a slower, more strenuous form of travel that left virtually no trace on the ground below. His panic began to subside, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. This was a problem, an equation to be solved. The variables were terrain, stamina, and the terrifying constant of Logan. He dropped back to the ground in a dense thicket of ferns, landing softly on the balls of his feet. He stayed there for a long moment, motionless, just listening. The forest was alive with its normal evening chorus. Nothing seemed out of place. Had he lost him? Snicked. The sound was faint, carried on the wind, but it was as loud as a thunderclap in his mind. The unmistakable sound of Logan's claws extending. It was a signal. A taunt. I'm close. Izuku's blood ran cold. He pressed himself flat against the earth, pulling ferns over his body, trying to make himself one with the forest floor. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate, making himself as small and as silent as a stone. He heard him before he saw him. A faint rustle of leaves, a soft footfall that would have been imperceptible to his old self. Through a gap in the ferns, he saw a shape move through the trees. It was Logan. He wasn't running or crashing through the brush. He moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, his head low, his senses cast out like a net. He wasn't walking. He was flowing through his environment, a predator in its natural element. Logan paused near the creek where Izuku had entered the water. He knelt, examining the bank. Even from a distance, Izuku could see the slight narrowing of his eyes, the subtle twitch of his nose as he tasted the air. He was reading the story Izuku had left behind. Then, Logan's head snapped up. His gaze swept the forest, and for one heart-stopping second, his eyes seemed to lock directly onto Izuku's hiding spot. Izuku's body went rigid. He was found. It was over, but Logan's gaze moved on. He hadn't seen him. He had sensed him. He knew the general direction, but not the exact spot. Logan continued on, moving parallel to the creek, his pace unhurried, confident. He was cutting off the angle, predicting where Izuku would have to go to reach the river. He was being herded. The realization hit Izuku like a physical blow. He wasn't escaping. He was being driven into a trap. The river, his supposed goal, was the killing floor. Logan was pushing him toward open ground, limiting his options, controlling the hunt from the very beginning. Desperation began to creep back in. He couldn't outrun Logan. He couldn't outlast him. Logan's stamina was superhuman, and his senses meant that hiding was only a temporary solution. Every second he waited, the net was tightening. He was prey, and the predator was closing in. He lay there, hidden in the ferns, his mind a whirlwind of fear and tactical calculations. Think like prey, you die like prey. Logan's words from weeks ago echoed in his ears. What did prey do? It ran. It hid. It hoped. And it died. So what was the alternative? The thought was so audacious, so insane, that he almost dismissed it. Stop being the rabbit. Start being the hunter. He couldn't beat Logan in a fight. That was suicide. He couldn't outsense him. But Logan had one blind spot, his own arrogance. He was the predator. He expected his prey to act a certain way. He expected fear, flight, and desperation. He wouldn't expect a counterattack. He wouldn't expect the rabbit to have teeth. A new energy flooded Izuku's veins, burning away the fear and exhaustion. It was the thrill of analysis, the surge of a plan clicking into place. He was no longer just Izuku Midoriya, the frightened boy. He was the sum of his training. He had the analytical mind that could dissect any quirk, and he had the survival skills Logan had beaten into him. It was time to merge them. He began to move again, but this time, his movements were different. He wasn't fleeing from Logan anymore. He was moving toward a destination of his own choosing. He crept through the undergrowth, using every shadow, every bit of cover. He was looking for a weapon. Not a real weapon, but a terrain advantage. A place where he could turn the tables. He found it a few minutes later, a narrow, game trail that cut through a steep, heavily wooded ravine. On one side, the earth was soft and undercut from erosion. Above it, precariously balanced, was a massive, rotted log, held in place only by a thick tangle of vines and its own immense weight. It was perfect. Izuku's mind worked with feverish speed. It was a classic deadfall trap, something he'd sketched in his notebook after reading a history book on guerrilla warfare. Simple, but effective. He scrambled up the side of the ravine, his fingers digging into the soft earth. He found the key vine, the one that seemed to bear most of the log's weight. It was as thick as his wrist. He didn't have a knife. He would have to use his hands and a sharp rock. He worked frantically, sawing at the tough fibers of the vine, his raw hands screaming in protest. The sun was almost gone now, and the forest was sinking into a deep, primal twilight. He had to hurry. He severed the vine just enough, leaving only a few tough strands holding it together. He then found his position, a dense cluster of bushes on the opposite side of the ravine, giving him a clear view of the trail and the trap. Now came the hardest part. He had to be the bait. He took a deep breath, and did the one thing he had been desperately trying to avoid for the last hour. He made noise. He snapped a branch, a loud, deliberate crack that echoed in the quiet woods. He kicked a stone, sending it skittering down the path. He was announcing his position, painting a target on his own back. He then scrambled into his hiding spot and became utterly still, his entire being focused on the trail below. He waited. The silence that followed was the most profound he had ever experienced. Every rustle of a leaf, every chirp of a cricket sounded like a gunshot. His heart was a slow, heavy drum in his chest. Was the trap too obvious? Had Logan sensed his change in tactics? Then he appeared. A shadow detaching itself from other shadows. Logan moved onto the game trail, his steps completely silent on the packed earth. He paused directly under the log, his head cocked, sniffing the air. He knew something was wrong. His predator's intuition was screaming at him. He was scanning the bushes, his eyes seeming to pierce the darkness, and for a terrifying moment, Izuku was sure he'd been spotted. Now, Izuku didn't hesitate. He had one chance. He picked up the baseball-sized rock he'd selected and threw it with all his might, not at Logan, but at the weakened vine. The rock struck true. The last fibers of the vine snapped with a sound like a pistol shot. For a fraction of a second, the massive log seemed to hang in the air. Then, with a deep, groaning roar, it fell. Logan moved with impossible speed. He didn't try to run. He reacted, twisting his body and bringing his arms up, his claws extended. The log crashed down, not on his head, but across his shoulders and back. The impact was immense, throwing up a cloud of dirt and splintered wood. It slammed him face down into the trail, the sheer weight of it pinning him to the earth. A normal man would have been crushed into paste. But Izuku could hear a low, pained grunt, then a furious growl. The trap hadn't killed him. It wasn't meant to. It was meant to do one thing: surprise him, pin him, win the game. The forest fell silent again, the dust settling in the gloom. Izuku's body was trembling with a massive adrenaline dump, but he forced himself to stand. He stepped out from behind the bushes, his heart in his throat. Slowly, with a sound of straining wood and protesting muscle, the log began to lift. Logan was pushing himself up, the massive weight on his back a mere inconvenience. He got to his hands and knees and then, with a final, furious roar, shrugged the log off his back. It rolled down into the ravine with a final, shuddering crash. Logan stood up, brushing dirt and splinters from his shoulders. There was a long, deep gash on his back, already beginning to knit itself closed. He turned slowly, his eyes finding Izuku in the darkness. They were not angry. They were not the eyes of a predator who had lost its prey. They were blazing with a fierce, almost shocking, pride. Izuku stood his ground, his chest heaving. He was terrified, but he didn't let it show. He had done it. He hadn't run. He hadn't hidden. He had fought back with the only weapons he had, his mind and his environment. Logan took a slow step toward him, then another. He stopped just a few feet away, looking the boy up and down as if seeing him for the first time. "You stopped running," Logan said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I had you. You were hurt and tired. Could have been over in 5 minutes. But you stopped. You told me to stop thinking like prey," Izuku managed to say, his voice steady despite the tremor in his limbs. Logan was silent for a long moment, the sounds of the night forest closing in around them. He looked at the shattered log, at the carefully weakened vine, and back at the boy who had used his own lessons against him. The boy who had turned the hunt on its head. A slow, dangerous grin spread across Logan's face. It wasn't a kind expression, but it was the highest praise Izuku had ever received. It was a sign of respect from one predator to another. "Good kid," he grunted, the words carrying the weight of a profound truth. "You stopped thinking like prey. You started thinking like a predator." The 10th month was a month of quiet consolidation. The monumental task of clearing Dagoba Beach was complete. Where once mountains of rusted, forgotten things had stood, there was now a vast, clean expanse of sand that met the gentle lapping of the sea. The rising sun, once obscured by towers of junk, now had an uninterrupted view of the shore, painting it each morning in brilliant strokes of orange and violet. The air, once thick with the stench of decay, now tasted only of salt and promise. The beach had been transformed, and so had Izuku Midoriya. He stood at the water's edge, barefoot, the cool morning tide washing over his ankles. The sun had tanned his skin to a healthy bronze, and a fine web of silvery scars crisscrossed his hands, forearms, and shoulders, a permanent record of his brutal education. He was still lean, but the soft, uncertain lines of boyhood had been carved away, replaced by the dense, economical muscle of a survivor. He carried himself with a stillness that was utterly alien to the fidgety, anxious boy he had been. It was the poised stillness of a predator at rest, every sense alert, every fiber of his being ready to uncoil into action at a moment's notice. Logan stood a few yards away, arms crossed, watching him. Their routine had settled into a new rhythm. The grueling physical labor was done, replaced by more advanced training. Mornings were for sparring and sensory drills. Afternoons were for urban traversal, learning the city's rooftops and alleyways as intimately as he had once known the forest. "You're thinking too loud," Logan grunted, his voice a familiar gravelly rumble that cut through the whisper of the waves. Izuku didn't turn. "I was analyzing the tide patterns," he replied, his voice calm and even. "There's a rip current about 50 meters out. The surface looks calm, but the sand is being pulled away underneath. It's a trap." "Good," Logan said. "Never trust a pretty picture. The deadliest things are the ones that look harmless. Remember that." A comfortable silence fell between them. It was a language they had learned to speak fluently. In the beginning, Izuku had tried to fill every silence with nervous chatter, with questions and analysis. Logan had beaten that out of him, literally. He had taught him the value of quiet observation, of letting the world reveal itself instead of trying to force it into a notebook. Now, they could spend hours together without a word, communicating only through the shared understanding of their environment. Izuku had become more than a student. He was a partner in this strange, isolated world they had built. He patched Logan up after the nightmares got bad and the claws came out in his sleep. Logan, in turn, ensured Izuku ate properly, reset his dislocated joints with a practiced, painful efficiency, and occasionally, in a rare moment of gruff affection, would toss him a piece of jerky with a quiet, "You earned it, kid." He was the closest thing to a father Izuku had ever known. And Logan, though he would never, ever admit it, saw in this resilient, unbreakable boy the son he'd lost and the legacy he never thought he'd have. He was Logan's cub. It was in this moment of quiet peace, with the sun warming their faces and the world feeling, for once, stable and predictable, that reality decided to tear itself apart again. It started, as it had before, with a feeling. A low hum that vibrated up from the soles of Izuku's feet. The air grew thick, crackling with a familiar, terrifying static. The scent of ozone, sharp and sterile, cut through the salty air. Both of them froze. They turned in unison, their eyes drawn to the same spot in the center of the beach. The air began to shimmer, the light bending around a point of gravitational wrongness. "No!" Izuku whispered, a cold dread washing over him. The shimmer twisted, warped, and then ripped open. The same nauseating vortex of chaotic, impossible colors from 10 months ago bloomed into existence, its high-pitched whine a scream that scraped at their senses. It was smaller this time, less violent, but its presence was a definitive, heartbreaking statement. It had come back. Logan stared at the rift, his face an unreadable mask of granite. But Izuku, who had learned to read the subtle shifts in his mentor's posture, the minute tightening of the muscles in his jaw, saw it all. He saw the flicker of surprise, the weary resignation, and a deep, profound sorrow that Logan would die before ever showing. "Looks like my ride's here," Logan said, his voice unnaturally flat. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. He had known, intellectually, that Logan didn't belong here. That he was a stray, a visitor from another world. But in the crucible of their shared pain and training, that intellectual knowledge had been burned away, replaced by the simple, solid fact of Logan's presence. He was a constant. A mountain. And now, the mountain was about to vanish. "You can't," Izuku said, the words catching in his throat. It wasn't a plea, it was a statement of disbelief. "You can't go." Logan turned to face him, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "Wasn't my choice to get here, kid. Ain't my choice to leave. That's just the way it is." He looked from Izuku to the shimmering portal and back again. A grim, final decision settled in his eyes. "We're not done," he said, his voice dropping into the familiar cadence of a drill sergeant. "We got time for one last lesson. One final exam." He began to walk toward the center of the beach, cracking his knuckles. "All the drills, all the pain, all the lectures. It all comes down to this. You and me. No holds barred. You show me what you've learned." Izuku stared, his mind reeling. A final spar? Now? With Logan's departure hanging over them like a guillotine? It felt cruel, senseless. But then he saw the look in Logan's eyes. This wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. It was the only way Logan knew how to say goodbye. Not with words, but with action. With a shared ritual of controlled violence that had forged their bond. He took a deep breath, pushing down the grief and the fear. He compartmentalized it, turning it into fuel, just as he'd been taught. His sadness sharpened into focus. His fear hardened into resolve. He closed his eyes, took a fighting stance in the sand, and when he opened them, he was no longer a grieving boy. He was a warrior. "Let's begin," Izuku said, his voice steady. Logan grinned, a flash of feral pride. Atabu, he didn't charge. He flowed. He came at Izuku not with a bull rush but with the deceptive, gliding speed of a striking snake. A jab, a cross, a leg sweep, a three-move combination designed to test Izuku's reflexes to their absolute limit. The old Izuku would have been on his back before he even processed the first move. The new Izuku moved with him. He parried the jab with his forearm, the impact jarring but manageable. He ducked under the cross, the wind of its passage stirring his hair. He hopped back from the leg sweep, landing silently on the balls of his feet. He had survived the opening salvo, Not bad. Logan grunted, and came again. The fight was a blur of motion, a brutal dance on the sand. It wasn't about power. Izuku knew he couldn't match Logan's raw strength, and he didn't have a quirk to fall back on. This was about skill, strategy, and endurance. It was a test of everything Logan had hammered into his very soul. Izuku used his smaller size and lower center of gravity to his advantage. He stayed in close, a tactic that would be suicide against most opponents, but against Logan, it was his only chance. It forced the bigger man to adjust, it kept him from building up momentum for his powerful haymakers. He became a whirlwind of elbows, knee strikes, and open palm hits aimed at nerve clusters and joints, the weak points he had spent months memorizing. Logan, for his part, fought with a terrifying precision. He wasn't trying to hurt Izuku, but he wasn't holding back either. Every block was a lesson in pain tolerance. Every strike that slipped through Izuku's guard was a sharp, stinging reminder of a momentary lapse in focus. He was a grinding stone, and he was giving Izuku one last, violent polish. He's favoring his left knee, Izuku's analytical mind noted, even as he twisted to avoid a clothesline that would have taken his head off. Old injury. He puts less weight on it when he pivots. He stored the information, looking for an opportunity. The fight moved toward the water. Logan drove him back with a relentless flurry of blows, forcing him into the surf. The water swirled around their ankles, cold and shocking. The environment is a weapon, Logan's voice echoed in his memory. As Logan lunged, Izuku dropped low, scooping a double handful of wet, heavy sand and flinging it directly into Logan's face. It was the same trick he'd used in the forest, but this time Logan was ready. He shielded his eyes with his forearm and powered through, grabbing Izuku by the front of his shirt and lifting him into the air. For a terrifying second, Izuku was helpless, dangling from the bigger man's grasp. Then he acted. Instead of struggling, he went limp, then used the momentum to swing his legs up, wrapping them around Logan's neck in a triangle choke. At the same time, he drove the heels of his hands upwards into the pressure points beneath Logan's jaw. Logan roared, a sound of fury and surprise, and slammed him down into the shallow water. The impact drove the air from Izuku's lungs, but he held on, his legs locked, his hands pressing. He was a barnacle on a battleship, and he refused to let go. With a final, explosive surge of strength, Logan ripped him off and threw him. Izuku hit the water, rolled, and came up sputtering, already back in a defensive crouch. They stood 10 feet apart, water dripping from their bodies, chests heaving. A thin trickle of blood ran from Izuku's lip. Logan wiped the sand from his face, his eyes blazing with an intensity that was part fury, part elation. You've learned the dirty tricks, Logan growled, a hint of a proud grin on his face. But you're still relying on them. What happens when the tricks run out? Snicked. The sound cut through the air, chilling Izuku to the bone. 3 gleaming adamantium claws slid from each of Logan's fists. They were not a threat. They were the final part of the exam. Come on, kid! Logan snarled, beckoning him with his claws. Show me you're not afraid of the monster. Show me you know how to disarm a weapon. This was it. The ultimate test. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest, but his mind was ice cold. He analyzed the situation. The claws were deadly, but they also limited Logan's options. He couldn't grapple. His fists were no longer blunt instruments. He had 6 feet of razor-sharp steel to account for. Izuku moved in, feinting left, then darting right. Logan swiped, the claws leaving 6 shimmering trails in the air where Izuku's head had been a split second before. The wind from the attack alone was a physical force. Izuku didn't back down. He pressed the attack, forcing Logan to use the claws defensively. He slapped at his wrists, trying to control the weapons, using the flats of his hands to redirect the lethal points. It was a dance on the edge of a razor blade, where one miscalculation meant a severed limb. He saw his opening. Logan swiped low with his right hand. Izuku leaped, not away, but over the swipe, his foot landing on Logan's outstretched forearm. He used it as a springboard, launching himself upwards. In midair, he twisted, grabbing Logan's right wrist with both hands, using his body weight to lock the arm and turn the deadly claws away from him. They crashed to the ground together in a tangle of limbs. Izuku held the arm lock, his muscles screaming with the effort. Logan was impossibly strong, a caged animal fighting the trap. With a roar, Logan tried to bring his other clawed hand around. Izuku knew he couldn't hold on. He had one last move. One last dirty trick. With his left hand still holding Logan's wrist, he brought his right hand up and slammed his thumb, hard, into Logan's eye. It was a shocking, intimate act of violence. Logan bellowed in pain and rage, his head snapping back. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Izuku released the arm lock, rolled away, and scrambled to his feet. The fight was over. Logan lay on his back for a moment, his one good eye blinking at the sky. He pushed himself up, the claws retracting with a soft, fleshy sound. His other eye was watering, red and angry, but already healing. He looked at Izuku, who stood 10 feet away, breathing in deep, ragged gulps, his body bruised and trembling but unbroken. He hadn't won. He had survived. He had faced the Wolverine and earned a stalemate. Logan slowly got to his feet. He walked over to Izuku and, for the first time in 10 months, he placed a heavy, calloused hand on the boy's shoulder. "The first lesson was pain," Logan said, his voice quiet and rough with emotion. "The last lesson is survival. You pass, kid. You pass." Izuku finally let the tension drain from his body. He sagged under the weight of Logan's hand, the grief he had held back now flooding his senses. The dimensional rift was still there, a patient, whining vortex in the background. Their time was up. Logan's hand dropped from his shoulder. He reached up and pulled a thin, metal chain from around his neck. Dangling from it were 2 worn, scratched dog tags. He pressed them into Izuku's hand. They were cool to the touch, and surprisingly heavy, weighted with a history Izuku could only guess at. One was stamped with the name Logan. The other, James Howlett. "I ain't got much to give," Logan said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "But they're a reminder of who you were, and who you choose to be. Don't ever let anyone else tell you who you are, Izuku. Not your friends, not your enemies, not the whole damn world. You decide. You alone." Izuku closed his fist around the dog tags, the metal edges digging into his scarred palm. He could only nod, his throat too tight for words. "And one last thing," Logan said, turning to face him fully. His eyes, one still slightly bloodshot, were fierce and unwavering. "Remember the most important rule. The one that comes before all the others. You live. I don't care if you have to crawl, if you have to run, if you have to play dead. You do whatever it takes, but you survive. You live to fight another day. Promise me." "I promise," Izuku whispered, his voice cracking. Logan gave him a single, sharp nod. That was it. No long farewells. No tearful embraces. That wasn't his way. He turned his back on the boy he had forged into a weapon and a survivor, and walked toward the shimmering tear in reality. He didn't look back. He reached the edge of the rift, paused for a fraction of a second, and then stepped through. The portal constricted, twisted, and with a final, echoing crack, it snapped shut, leaving behind nothing but the scent of ozone and a profound, deafening silence. He was gone. Izuku stood alone on the empty beach, the dog tags clutched in his hand. The sun was higher now, the day proceeding as if the universe hadn't just been torn open and stitched back together. He didn't cry. The boy who cried was gone, beaten out of him on this very sand. In his place was someone who knew how to endure pain, how to compartmentalize it and carry it. He slipped the chain over his head, tucking the cold metal tags under his shirt. They rested against his skin, a permanent, physical reminder of the man who had saved him by breaking him. He turned and began the long walk home, his future an unknown, terrifying blank. The first indication that the world had not forgotten him was the sound of an explosion. He was halfway home, walking through a crowded shopping district, a ghost moving through a world he no longer felt a part of. The blast was close, just a few blocks away. A plume of black smoke billowed into the sky. People screamed, running in the opposite direction, a panicked herd fleeing a predator. Izuku's training kicked in instantly. He didn't run. He moved toward the chaos, his body low, using the fleeing crowd as cover. He vaulted over a knocked-over vendor stall, his movements fluid and efficient. He moved not with the frantic desperation of a fanba, but with the grim purpose of a soldier moving toward the sound of the guns. He rounded a corner and saw it. The scene was sickeningly familiar. It was the sludge villain, the same one from 10 months ago, but bigger now, more viscous. It had a hostage, and through the swirling, murky green, Izuku saw a familiar spiky blonde haircut and the flash of desperate, terrified red eyes. Bakugo. Pro-heroes were on the scene, but they were ineffective. Kamui Woods couldn't find a purchase on the fluid body. Death Arms was too slow. Empty Lady couldn't fit into the narrow alleyway. They were containing the situation, saving civilians, but they weren't solving the problem. Izuku's mind, a finely honed tactical computer, processed the scene in a fraction of a second. Target, sludge villain. Hostage, Katsuki Bakugo, quirk, explosion. Villain composition, fluid, resistant to blunt force trauma. Weakness, solid components, eyes, teeth, are vulnerable. Hostage is suffocating, using his quirk is only making the villain's body more volatile. He saw the heroes hesitating, waiting for someone with the right quirk. He saw Bakugo's struggles growing weaker. He saw the fire, the fear, the indecision, and he heard Logan's voice in his head, cold and clear. In a real fight, there's no time for monologues. Disrupt. Disable. End it. Before he knew it, he was moving. He didn't charge and screaming. He sprinted, his path a calculated line through the debris. His eyes scanned the ground, and he saw it, a length of steel rebar from a damaged building, about 3 feet long. He scooped it up without breaking stride. "Get back here, you fool! It's suicide!" Death Arms yelled. Izuku ignored him. He didn't see a monster. He saw a target with a quantifiable weakness. He leaped over a burning car, using the hood as a launch pad. The villain's massive, singular eye swiveled to focus on him. It was a solid, vulnerable point in a sea of liquid chaos. He didn't aim for the eye. That was what it would expect. That was the obvious target. Instead, as he closed the distance, he threw his charred, useless backpack at the villain's eye. It was a pathetic projectile, but it served its purpose. It was a distraction. The eye blinked, a momentary reflex. In that split second, Izuku slid on the slick ground, dropping low beneath the villain's flailing tendrils. He was now at the base of the creature, right where it was holding Bakugo. He could see Bakugo's face, contorted in a silent scream. He didn't try to pull him out. He couldn't. Instead, he drove the sharpened end of the rebar into the base of the villain's body, right next to Bakugo's head. Then, with a surge of strength born from months of moving impossible weights, he levered it. The effect was immediate. The rebar created a channel, a momentary gap in the viscous sludge. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Air rushed in. Bakugo, who had been on the verge of blacking out, took a desperate, ragged gasp of air. The oxygen hit his lungs, and with a final, defiant roar, he unleashed a massive, point-blank explosion. The concentrated blast, directed outwards through the channel Izuku had created, was devastating. The sludge villain screamed, its body destabilizing, losing its grip. It was in that moment of chaos that a booming voice roared. "I am here!" All Might, in his magnificent, smiling form, appeared. He had been inspired by the boy's insane, tactical courage. With a single, mighty Texas smash, he punched the air, and the resulting wind pressure blasted the destabilized sludge villain apart, splattering it harmlessly across the alley walls. Rain began to fall. The battle was over. Later, after being berated by the pro-heroes and praised for his quirk by Bakugo, a backhanded, furious praise, but praise nonetheless, Izuku was walking home, the adrenaline finally leaving his system, leaving him feeling hollow and empty. "I am here, walking like a normal person!" Izuku turned to see All Might, in his true, skeletal form, skidding around the corner. The conversation that followed was a strange echo of their first meeting, but the dynamic was fundamentally different. "Young man," All Might began, "I have come to thank you, and to apologize. But first, I have to ask. What you did back there, that wasn't just reckless courage. That was tactical. Calculated. Your file says you're quirkless." "How?" Izuku looked at the number 1 hero. He saw not an idol, but a man. A tired, wounded man trying to do the right thing. He thought of Logan. I had a good teacher, Izuku said simply, his hand unconsciously touching the dog tags under his shirt. All Might stared at him, seeing the quiet, unbreakable resolve in the boy's eyes. This wasn't the crying, desperate fanboy from the rooftop. This was someone else, someone forged in a fire All Might couldn't comprehend. And in that moment he knew. His search for a successor was over. Young man, All Might said, a new conviction in his voice. Earlier today, I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. I was wrong. You, more than anyone I have ever met, possess the spirit of a true hero. That is why I have chosen you. He stood tall, a strange majesty about his emaciated form. My quirk is not something I was born with. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. Its name is one for all, and I believe you are worthy of inheriting my power. Izuku listened, his mind absorbing the incredible revelation. One for all. A transferable quirk. A power that could be given. It was the miracle he had dreamed of his entire life. But the boy who had dreamed that dream was gone. Izuku looked at his scarred hands, then at All Might. He didn't burst into tears. He didn't fall to his knees in gratitude. He thought of 10 months of agony on a beach. He thought of the cold, hard lessons of survival in a forest. He thought of the weight of a man's legacy in the form of 2 dog tags against his chest. He had been prepared to be a hero with nothing. He had accepted that path. This was something else. It wasn't a miracle. It was a tool. A responsibility. A weapon. And he, more than anyone, now understood the weight of such things. He met All Might's gaze, his own eyes clear and resolute. Okay, Izuku Midoriya said, his voice quiet but unshakable. I accept. The gates of Ue High loomed before him, a monument of glass and steel that seemed to scrape the sky. For a decade, this place had been the nexus of all his hopes and dreams, a hallowed ground he could only ever imagine walking. To the Izuku of 10 months ago, this moment would have been overwhelming, a culmination so profound he would have been shaking, probably crying, definitely muttering up a storm. But as Izuku Midoriya stood before the entrance to the Hero Course exam, he felt a profound and unnerving calm. His heart wasn't racing. His palms weren't sweating. He was observing. His senses, honed by months of relentless, life-or-death training, were cataloging everything. The subtle tension in the shoulders of the other applicants, the arrogant swagger of a boy with a powerful emitter quirk, the nervous chatter of a group of girls, their fear a palpable scent in the cool morning air. He saw the security cameras swiveling in their housings, noted their blind spots. He felt the faint vibration through the soles of his shoes from a subterranean transport system. This wasn't a sacred temple. It was a fortress. And he was here to prove he was worthy of standing on its walls. He took a step forward and promptly tripped over his own feet. A flicker of the old, clumsy Deku. A ghost of the boy he used to be. He was so focused on the grand tactical picture that he'd missed the uneven paving stone right in front of him. He flailed, gravity taking hold, a humiliating faceplant just seconds into his UA career. Before he could hit the ground, a light touch on his shoulder arrested his fall. He felt a strange weightlessness, and found himself floating an inch above the concrete. Whoa there! Are you okay? A bright, cheerful voice asked. It's bad luck to fall on the big day. He turned to see a girl with a round, friendly face, rosy cheeks, and a short brown bob. She was holding her hands together, fingertips touching, a look of genuine concern in her eyes. It was the girl from the entrance. Uraraka Achiko. Oh. Thank you, Izuku said, finding his footing as she released her quirk. The sensation of normal gravity returning was a strange lurch. I'm fine. Just clumsy. It's super nerve-wracking, right? I'm so spun out, she said, vibrating with a nervous energy that was both endearing and completely alien to his current state of mind. Well, good luck in there. She gave him a bright smile and hurried on ahead. Izuku watched her go, a small, genuine smile touching his own lips for the first time that morning. It was a brief, pleasant reminder of a world outside of pain thresholds and tactical analysis. Then, he refocused. A floating quirk. Useful for mobility and rescue. Weakness. Likely has a weight limit and requires physical contact to activate. Good to know. He tucked the information away and continued toward the auditorium, his stride once again sure and steady. The written exam was a formality. His mind, already a finely tuned machine for analysis, tore through the questions with ruthless efficiency. The physical portion was what mattered. He sat in the massive orientation hall, listening to the booming voice of President Mike. The hero's sheer volume was an irritant, a piece of useless noise in the environment. Izuku tuned it out, focusing instead on the handout, his eyes scanning the details of the practical exam. Robots. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, 3-pointers. A simple point-based system. Destroy as many as possible within the time limit. He looked at the diagrams of the robots, his mind already dissecting them. Bipedal, likely powered by an internal battery pack located in the torso. Joints at the knees and elbows would be hydraulic, a potential weak point. The head unit likely contained the primary sensors. Then, President Mike mentioned the final obstacle. And then there's the 0-pointer. This big fella is more of an obstacle you should try to avoid. It's worth 0 points, so there's no reason to take it on. Think of it as a gimmick. On the screen flashed an image of a colossal robot that towered over the mock city buildings. It was a beast of steel and rivets, a walking skyscraper. The other students gasped and muttered nervously. Izuku just stared, his expression unreadable. He saw the joints. He saw the hydraulics. He saw the massive, unstable head. He didn't see a gimmick. He saw a problem with a solution. They were herded into buses and taken to their designated battle centers. Izuku found himself in Battle Center B, a sprawling, realistic replica of a dense urban environment. He stretched, feeling the unfamiliar power of one for all thrumming beneath his skin. He had it. He'd eaten the hair. He'd inherited the quirk of his idol. But it was a wild, untamed thing. All Might's 10 months of training for him had been a crash course, focused on building his body to a point where it wouldn't just explode upon using the power. He'd managed to channel it a few times, resulting in a shattered arm or a broken leg. All Might had called it a cannon made of glass. Logan would have called it a tool he hadn't learned how to use yet. Never rely on one weapon. Logan's voice echoed in his memory. Doesn't matter if it's a rifle, a knife, or a fancy damn quirk. A weapon can break. It can be taken. It can be countered. Your body, your mind, your environment. Those are the weapons that are always with you. Everything else is just a bonus. One for all was his bonus. A ridiculously oversized, city block leveling bonus. But he wouldn't rely on it. He couldn't. His body was still the glass cannon. One full power punch and his exam would be over. Efficiency. Precision. That was the path Logan had beaten into him. And start! President Mick's voice blared from hidden speakers. The massive gates slid open. The other applicants hesitated for a second, confused by the abrupt start. Izuku didn't. The moment the sound hit his ears, he was moving. He burst through the gates like a shot, a green and black blur against the concrete. What's he doing? There's no countdown in a real fight. President Mick's voice boomed over the speakers, a hint of approval in his tone. Izuku was already deep into the city before the others had even started running. He saw his first target, a 1-pointer, rolling out of an alleyway. It was squat and armored, its single red eye glowing. Instead of charging it head-on, he veered left, running straight up the wall of a 3-story building. His muscles, honed by months of brutal conditioning, propelled him upwards. He used the window ledges and drain pipes as handholds, a parkour flow Logan had drilled into him until he could do it in his sleep. From the rooftop, he looked down on the robot. Vulnerable spot, sensor unit on top of the chassis. He leaped. He didn't power up. He didn't shout a special move. He just dropped, twisting his body in midair. He landed feet first on the robot's head, his combined weight and momentum enough to crush the sensor unit with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. The robot sparked, spasmed, and fell silent. 1 point. No damage. No energy wasted. He flowed off the deactivated robot and continued his sprint down the street. 2 more 1-pointers and a 2-pointer converged on him. He didn't stop. He ran straight at them, then used the lead robot as a vaulting horse, planting a hand on its head and launching himself over it. As he sailed over the second robot, he channeled the smallest possible spark of one for all into the tip of his finger, not a flick, but a precise, surgical tap. The green lightning crackled for a fraction of a second as he struck the exposed hydraulic line in the robot's neck joint. The line burst, spraying fluid, and the robot's head lolled to the side, its limbs locking up. He landed in a roll, coming up behind the third robot. A quick, powerful kick, pure muscle, no quirk, to the back of its knee joint buckled its leg. As it stumbled, he drove the heel of his hand into its power pack, dislodging it with a sharp crack. 3 robots down in under 10 seconds. He hadn't broken a sweat. In a darkened observation room, screens flickered, displaying feeds from every battle center. A group of pro-heroes, the faculty of UA, watched the proceedings. "That kid in Battle Center B, the one with the green hair," a voice said. It was the pro-hero Snipe, leaning forward in his chair. "He's got no registered quirk, but he's moving like a pro." "What's his deal?" All Might, in his skeletal form, sat in the back, trying to look inconspicuous. A small, proud smile tugged at his lips. "His movements are highly efficient." Mizu, the principal, chimed in, his beady eyes gleaming with intellectual curiosity. "There is no wasted energy. Every action has a purpose. He's not fighting them, he's dismantling them." Aizawa Shota, also known as Eraserhead, leaned forward, his perpetually tired eyes now wide with interest. He zoomed in on the feet of Izuku. "Look at that! He's not using a quirk, not a strength-enhancing one anyway. His physical scores from the entrance exam were off the charts, but this is something else. This is tactical. He's treating this like an infiltration mission, not a brawl." On the screen, Izuku was now facing a 3-pointer. It was a heavily armored, tank-like robot with multiple laser cannons. The other applicants were giving it a wide berth. Izuku didn't. He ran toward it, but not at it. He ran into a nearby storefront, smashing through the plate glass window. "Reckless," Midnight commented. "Is it?" Aizawa countered, his gaze unwavering. Izuku emerged from the back of the store, now behind the 3-pointer. He'd used the building as cover to bypass its front-facing weaponry. The robot's back was a mess of exposed wiring and cooling vents. Izuku leaped onto its back, ripped open a service panel, and with another minuscule, precise spark of one for all, short-circuited its primary power conduit. The massive robot shuddered and died, its cannons drooping lifelessly. "No," Aizawa said, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. "Not reckless. Logical." He looked at the boy's file again. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk, unregistered. It was a lie. There was a quirk there, a powerful one, he could feel it. But the boy was refusing to use it, or, more accurately, he was choosing not to rely on it. He was winning with pure skill, strategy, and a level of combat awareness Aizawa hadn't seen in a first-year applicant in years. This kid wasn't just another powerhouse. He was a problem. A fascinating, 0-point problem. The points were racking up. Izuku moved through the city like a wraith, a green ghost of calculated destruction. He was a whirlwind of precision strikes, environmental exploitation, and brutal efficiency. He disabled a 2-pointer by luring it onto a structurally unsound bridge, and then collapsing it. He took down another by tricking it into shooting a fire hydrant, then shorting it out with the spray of water. He was so focused, so in the zone, that he almost didn't notice the ground begin to shake. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the concrete canyons. Buildings trembled, dust raining down from their facades. The other applicants stopped in their tracks, their faces paling with fear. A shadow fell over the street. Izuku looked up, and up, and up. The 0-pointer. It was more massive than the pictures had conveyed. A true titan of steel, its single red eye scanning the battlefield with cold, mechanical indifference. It rose from behind a building, its footsteps shaking the very foundations of the mock city. Panic erupted. "It's the 0-pointer! Run! We can't fight that thing!" The other students turned and fled, a stampede of terror. It was the logical response. It was an obstacle, not an enemy. It was worth 0 points. Izuku's first instinct was the same. Avoid the unnecessary fight. Conserve energy. Re-engage targets of value. It was Logan's doctrine, pure and simple. He turned to leave, his mission to rack up more points not yet complete. Oof! A small cry of pain cut through the noise of the panic. Izuku stopped. He turned back. And his blood ran cold. The girl from the entrance, Uraraka, was trapped. She had stumbled while running, and her leg was pinned under a large piece of concrete debris, likely shaken loose by the zero-pointer's approach. She was struggling, her face a mask of pain and fear, trying desperately to free herself, and the zero-pointer was lumbering straight toward her. Its massive foot, the size of a city bus, rose into the air, preparing to take another step that would crush her into nothing. The heroes in the observation room held their breath. Well, this is the ultimate test of heroic spirit, isn't it? Nisa said quietly. To risk it all for no reward. All Might leaned forward, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Come on, my boy. Show them. Show them what it truly means. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. The tactical analysis was instantaneous, cold, and brutal. Target, zero-pointer. Objective, save the civilian. Time frame, approximately 4.5 seconds until impact. Personal risk, extreme. Reward, 0 points. He saw the heroes watching from the sidelines. They weren't intervening. This was part of the test. They wanted to see who would act. For a split second, he hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of calculation. A full power 1 for all strike would be necessary. It would shatter his limbs. It would end his exam. He would likely end up with the points he had, but he wouldn't be able to gather more. Was it a logical trade? Then he saw her face again, the genuine terror in her eyes. And he heard Logan's final, most important command echoing in the depths of his soul. You live. No matter what, you live to fight another day. He had misunderstood. Logan hadn't just meant for him to survive. He meant for him to help others survive. That was the point. That was the entire goddamn point. The calculation was over. The choice was made. He ran. He didn't scream. He didn't shout. His face was a mask of intense, absolute focus. One for all, the wild, untamed power, roared to life within him. Red lightning, so much more potent than the green sparks he'd used before, crackled across his skin. He felt the power surge through his legs, threatening to tear them apart from the sheer force. He pushed off the ground, and the world became a blur. He wasn't running up a building. He leaped. The ground beneath his feet cratered from the force of his departure. He soared through the air, a green and red meteor aimed at the heart of the beast. He wasn't aiming for the body. Hitting the torso would be like punching a skyscraper. He was aiming for the head. As he flew, his mind, still cold and analytical even in this moment of overwhelming power, dissected the target. He didn't just see a metal face. He saw the structural lines. He saw the seams where the armor plates were joined. He saw the central optic, the most reinforced point, and he saw the weaker plates around it. Hit the throat, break the knee, end it. Logan's voice was his guide. Find the weakness. He drew his right arm back, the sleeve of his tracksuit shredding under the strain as every muscle fiber screamed in protest. One for all converged, a supernova of inherited power, ready to be unleashed. But he didn't throw a wild, desperate haymaker. At the last second, he angled his body. He wasn't just going to punch it. He was going to focus the entire, world-breaking force of his blow on a single, structural weak point just to the side of the robot's optic sensor. Smash! The word was a guttural roar, torn from his throat. His fist connected with the zero-pointer's head. The sound was not a simple crash. It was a deafening, sonic boom that shattered every window for 3 city blocks. The impact was not a dent. It was a cataclysm. The robot's head didn't just buckle, it imploded. Izuku's fist, a focused projectile of impossible power, punched straight through the armored plating. The force radiated outwards, shattering the robot's internal mechanisms, blowing out its optic, and collapsing its entire head unit into a mangled wreck of twisted steel. The Titan's single red eye flickered and died. Its massive body, deprived of its control center, froze for a moment. Then, with a groaning shriek of tortured metal, it began to topple backward, away from Uraraka. The force of the punch, however, was a two-way street. The recoil was apocalyptic. Izuku felt the bones in his arm shatter into dust. The shockwave traveled up his shoulder, dislocating it, and down his legs, breaking them both in a half-dozen places. The power of One for All vanished, leaving him with nothing but agony and gravity. He hung in the air for a moment, his body a broken puppet, and then he began to fall. He looked down at his mangled, useless limbs. He saw the ground rushing up to meet him. So, this is it, he thought with a strange, detached calm. I saved her. But I'm not gonna live to fight another day. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. Slap! A hand slapped him hard across the face. He felt that strange, wonderful weightlessness again. His rapid descent slowed to a gentle float. He opened his eyes to see Uraraka, her face pale and strained, one hand outstretched toward him. She had used her quirk on the debris pinning her, making it light enough to push away, and then on him, saving his life. She brought him down gently, her quirk giving out the moment his feet touched the ground. She then promptly threw up from the exertion, a rainbow of something. Time's up! Present Mick's voice roared, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku lay on the ground, his body a shattered wreck, but his mind clear. He looked at the toppled, headless form of the zero-pointer. He looked at the safe, albeit nauseous, girl beside him. He looked at his broken limbs. It was a logical trade. An elderly woman in a hero costume, recovery girl, soon arrived on the scene, planting a kiss on his forehead that began the long, painful process of knitting his bones back together. As he drifted into an exhausted unconsciousness, the last thing he saw were the other applicants staring at him. They weren't looking at a clumsy, quirkless boy. They were looking at him with a mixture of awe, confusion, and fear. They were looking at the kid who had taken down the zero-pointer. In the observation room, the faculty was silent. Aizawa leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile on his face. This kid was going to be a nightmare to teach. He was going to be glorious. All Might wiped a tear of blood from the corner of his mouth, his heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. He had chosen well. The boy had the heart of a hero, the power of a legend, and now, thanks to some mysterious, gruff teacher, he had the mind of a survivor. Izuku Midoriya had finished with 45 villain points. A respectable, but not incredible, score. But as the teachers reviewed the footage, another score began to climb. Rescue points. For saving another applicant from mortal danger, his final score was 45 villain points, and 60 rescue points. He had not only passed. He had shattered the record. He was number one. The 0-point problem had been solved. And Izuku Midoriya's path to becoming a hero had truly, irrevocably, begun.